Europe once tore itself apart, twice, in wars so devastating they left a continent in ashes and a generation in mourning. But from that ruin, something extraordinary began to grow. A dream, not of conquest, but of connection. A vision that turned enemies into allies, rivals into partners. This is the story of how Europe rose from destruction to become one of the most ambitious unions in human history. In 1945, Europe was broken, cities shattered, economies ruined, and trust obliterated. 2 world wars in just 30 years had turned neighbors into nemeses. Winston Churchill, standing before a weary audience in 1946, spoke of a dream, a kind of United States of Europe. Few believed it possible. Yet beneath the rubble, something began to shift. Ordinary Europeans were tired of blood and blame. They wanted security, prosperity, and above all, peace. And that peace would come not through soldiers, but through steel and coal. In 1951, 6 nations, France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, signed the Treaty of Paris, creating the European Coal and Steel Community. The idea was revolutionary. If countries shared control of the resources needed for war, then war itself would become unthinkable. And it worked. Former enemies now managed their industries together, not as conquerors or captives, but as collaborators. It wasn't a union yet, but it was the first spark. The success of the Coal and Steel Pact inspired something bolder. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome founded the European Economic Community, a common market where goods, people, and ideas could move freely across borders. Imagine a French farmer selling in Germany without tariffs, or an Italian company expanding into Belgium without red tape. It was a quiet revolution, economic unity sowing political stability. By the 1970s, more nations wanted in. Denmark, Ireland, and the UK joined. Europe was growing, not through conquest, but through consent. Yet behind the optimism, shadows were forming. The 1970s brought oil shocks and economic turmoil. In the East, the Soviet Union loomed. In the West, unemployment rose. But the European project held firm. Then came 1989. The Berlin Wall fell. Europe, divided for half a century, suddenly faced a new challenge, reuniting itself. From the ashes of the Cold War, the dream grew larger, now including the nations once trapped behind the Iron Curtain. In 1992, leaders signed the Maastricht Treaty, giving birth to a new name: the European Union, a single currency, the euro, a shared parliament, a collective voice in a globalized world. For the first time in history, Europe stood together, not as an empire, but as a union of equals. The 21st century tested the union's strength: economic crises, migration, and political divides. The UK chose to lead. Other nations questioned how far integration should go. But despite the storms, the EU endures, a patchwork of languages, cultures, and histories bound by a single experiment. That peace can be built not by walls, but by will. 70 years ago, no one believed France and Germany could share more than a border. Today, they share a currency, a parliament, and a purpose. Narrator, softly. The rise of the European Union is not a story of perfection. It's a story of persistence, of how a continent scarred by war dared to imagine something greater. And against all odds, made it real. Europe's story isn't finished. The Union still rises, still struggles, still redefines what it means to be united. And perhaps that's its greatest strength. Not that it was ever complete, but that it never stops trying. Fade to black.